welcome to Beyond the Bio. This week I am joined by Urmi Hossain, who is a self-published author, speaker, podcast host, and finance professional based in Canada. She works in the financial services industry while actively advocating for women's empowerment. Urmi has written a book and hosts Stories Beyond Borders, which is a podcast amplifying diverse voices. She also serves as co-chair of Women in Leadership's Montreal chapter and is passionate about public speaking, mentorship, and continuous growth. Welcome to the show, Urmi.
Thank you. Thank you for having me.
No, I'm excited to get going. So you've built a brand alongside a full-time finance career, which I think is quite unusual. So tell me about what made you start and what did you want to be known for?
So let me tell you this. I always worked in the corporate world. I always worked in finance. And then what happened is one day I was talking to an entrepreneur. She is a friend of mine and she runs her own business and she comes from finance. And basically we had this conversation where I told her, I feel like I have all these like potentials and all these things that I want to be known for. And I have all these things that I want to do, but I'm not sure where to start. And I don't know if I should do any of those things. So she pushed me basically, like after having the conversation, she was like, yeah, I think you have a lot to offer and I think you can start from somewhere. And what happened is everything that I do right now, like they just started as a pure like trial and error. Like I just started as a fun thing, just for fun, and I wanted to see where this was going. And so when I first started in like working on like my personal brand, like there was no intentional goal. I just did it for the sake of doing it and like test the waters and see what I'm good, how I want to be known. But now it's been 5 years, and when I look back at myself and I think how far I've come, and I somehow like sometimes like I Google myself because I was like, let me see what's out there about me. I could see that there is me working in finance, but then there's me known for these other things that I do outside of my 9 to 5. So, me being an author, me being like having a podcast, me being the co-chair of an organization, me, being an advocate of women's empowerment. So the reason why, like, when I think about it right now and I think about, what is my personal brand and why I did it, it's because I think I wanted to leave a legacy, but I wasn't aware of it or like conscious of it when I started doing this. So what started as like, pure fun thing, it just started to be more concrete and more clear in my mind that this is how I want to be known, as someone who's like, giving back to the community, helping the women in the community. So that's why I do the things that I do. And I think having a brand is so important when you're working full time because personal brand is portable. Like no matter where you go, you always carry your own brand, your own identity, your own individuality. Whereas if you're strictly working for a company, you're just known to work for the company. But me, I want to be known like Urmi and not Urmi as, employee of X, Y, and Z.
That makes total sense. And I'm really keen to dive into some of those activities that you've done and what the return's been on some of those. But before we get to that, when people hear the term personal brand, they often think like influencer and it's not for me because of that. How would you describe it for someone who has got a serious corporate role? So maybe one of your colleagues or a friend that's in a corporate role and they're thinking about whether it is for them.
The way I like to define personal brand is basically how people talk about you when you're not in the room with these people, how people perceive you externally, like let's say, people suddenly start talking about you and they're saying, oh, Urmi is very determined, very disciplined, this and that. It's basically the perception that you have built around your identity. That's what personal brand is. For someone who's working, let's say, in their 9 to 5, I think it's even more important to have a personal brand because when you work from like 9 to 5, people know you just for whatever you do at work, but they do not know you for what you do outside of work, which I think it's important to cultivate, especially when you work 9 to 5, to have a more fulfilled and satisfied life.
And we've all got a personal brand, haven't we? So actually, why not do a lot of the activities that you've done to help amplify that and use it for good, whether that be for legacy or to amplify voices that aren't often heard? I totally agree. What would you say were the first practical steps or activities that actually made a difference to you where you were doing things and going, oh, right, wow, that's really moved the needle?
You know what? My very first step as like getting outside of my comfort zone and building, let's say, my brand was really by having a website. And I know that when first had the website and I had my blog, I had no clue how to build one, but I was like, you know what? I still want to do it. And I want to see if I'm good at this, if I need help, or if I'm capable of doing that. And when I first created the blog, it was like a lot of work, I have to be honest, because I didn't know how to start. And I know a lot of people hiring like freelancers and so forth. But having a blog was my first step in like testing the waters and like writing articles, like, talking about mentorship, talking about public speaking. And what happened is I would get subscribers and I would have people like leaving me a comment, and those were like the first signs that my work is having an impact in someone's life. And as soon as I was done with that, I was like, okay, let me just move to the next thing that like I want to try. So I started with like YouTube, then I started with like being interviewed in podcasts, then I was like, I'm gonna launch my own podcast. And then what happened is I was like, okay, I want to like write a book. And it was just but these little actions and continuous actions that I started to see the result, like people reaching out to me, reaching out for opportunities, reaching out for collaborations. And I didn't realize how big one step would have become, just having a blog and then, building other things. I didn't think it would have been such a massive reaction from the like from the audience, from the world in itself. And people reached out to me to like host event, people reached out to me like to
Amazing.
present, and I didn't think it was going to be that powerful, but I do kind of enjoy that. Yeah.
It's like a snowball effect where you say yes to one thing and then it creates other opportunities. How do you decide what to share publicly and what to keep private when you're also an employee? Like, where's the line?
I'm very selective, and I'm thinking about like the other side, like how would I feel if I'm sitting from the other side and there are things that I wouldn't like to read. And so that's how I'm thinking, like I'm putting in the shoes of the person reading my stuff, and that's how I make the decision. So typically everything that I do, I keep it quite professional but also relatable until a certain point, because I think it's important to create that connections and make things relatable, but at the same time, you want to be professional about the things that you put, like you don't want to like overly put out there, because then, whatever is out there, it's always going to be there. And if you work in the corporate world, like people are typically Googling you when they're looking for like potential employees and so forth. So you want to be careful that whatever you put out there is consistent with your image and the message that you're trying to give to the world. So for instance, like me, I have certain values, and there are certain things that I want to be known for, such as, giving back to the community, women's empowerment, and I talk about female mentorship. So whenever like I'm putting things out, I make sure that they're related to those like core messages that I have in my mind. And I did like a little exercise where I highlighted, my strengths, the words that I want to be associated with. I put down all my hobbies, my values, and that's how I usually create the content. I always make sure that it's consistent and everything is like tied together. So I talk about public speaking, I talk about career, I talk about traveling, and I always make sure that it's fun for me, but it's also fun for the other person who's reading about the things that I create. Yeah.
And do you have to be particularly careful with being in a regulated industry? Does that sort of curb what you can say to an extent?
Yeah, typically when you work in a very regulated industry, you have to be extremely, extremely careful, because, it's an industry where you're serving clients of, a certain profile. So you always, always have to be really, really careful. And of course, if you're putting things there that might, damage the reputation of where you're working, like that could be that could end up bad. So you always have to be super, super careful.
When you started being more proactive with your personal brand, did you worry about how your colleagues or leaders within your business might react? And how did you get over that and carry on?
Actually, my biggest worry was more related to like people in general. Like I was so afraid of like putting my story out there. I was so afraid of putting a picture of myself out there. I remember like I didn't even want to have a LinkedIn profile at the beginning. But then
Wow.
I thought I did not have a LinkedIn presence. Like I remember not having one. And I always used to be like, oh my gosh, people will find out what I do. People will be judgmental, people will say bad things about me. But then I told myself, if I do this, I'm just gonna be like always sitting in my comfort zone. And I also remember like when I would look at other people's work, I would always see them with admiration. And I was like, I look at these people with admiration. Are they worried about what people are thinking? And so that's when I told myself that, if I look at people with admiration, I'm pretty sure people might do the same thing about me if I start putting myself out there. So I really had to do that mental switch where I was like, you know what? It's not always necessarily going to be bad where people are judging you. There are also going to be, people who like your work and would like appreciate the work that you do. So as I always say, haters gonna hate, but then you also have people that, you have lovers who's gonna love. So I do like to think that the right people will come to you and they will like support your work.
I agree. And have you found that you have had any haters? Because I think with most concerns about how people are going to react, I think the reality is in real life, people just scroll on by or ignore what you're doing. But have you actually experienced anyone sort of trolling you or saying anything mean?
No, not really. And I think it was all just in my head. I was also like pleasantly surprised that even like people closer to me admire the work that I do. They were like, "Oh, you do a lot of great things too. Like, that's great. We want to be like you too." And I was like, "Oh, I didn't think that, people that I wasn't expecting to get that kind of answer would have said that."
Perfect. So, I mean, that just highlights the benefits, doesn't it? And we need to kind of get out of our heads in some ways. Tell me about your book. So, your book is about identity and belonging. How has it been for you getting the book out there? When did it come out?
July 2022, I read another book before publishing mine. And I reached out to the author and I said, "Oh my gosh, I read your book." And I just felt like I felt like you were telling my story when I was reading your book. And I was like, okay, I'm going to sit down and I'm going to start writing my book. And I knew what the story was going to be, which was the story of my identity. As since I was getting invited to many podcast shows and everyone was asking about, my whole identity, how I was able to find my cultural identity, how I navigated, growing up in two cultures and what were the struggles and, the challenges. I was like, this could be a good topic for the book. And so because I'm talking about my life, my story, my teenagehood, my childhood, I just started to write, about how it was to be born in Italy, how it was, to have Bengali parents, the struggle of like trying to fit in, but then at the same time, you felt like you were never enough. Like I never felt like I was Italian enough. I never felt like I was Bengali enough. So I'm talking about those things, but from a perspective of a young teenager who is South Asian, but at the same time, she's Italian. And so I make a comparison, and then at the end of this whole process, it literally took me 30 days. It took me 30 days, and then I hired a freelancer who helped me to basically edit it, format it, and then 2 weeks later, it was self-published. So that was a process, and it was quite an accomplishment. Like it was a big personal accomplishment for me.
Absolutely. And would you say the book has been the activity that's pushed your personal brand the most?
I think it was actually the book because I feel like not many people can say proudly, "Oh, I wrote a book," but I can go around and be like, "Yeah, I actually did it." So.
Yeah, it's a big deal. It is a big deal. And did the book create further opportunities for you?
It actually did because I feel like when I'm trying to quote unquote sell myself, I feel like I'm always highlighting that I wrote the book, I talk about this. So I feel like that's how I'm able to get like more projects, more collaboration, people wanting me to speak. And I think when you're writing a book, it also shows a little bit about your personality, It shows that you're determined. It means that you're a go-getter. It means that you are, you don't give up. And so that was also like an underlying message that I wanted to give to people that I'm not just this, but I'm also this person who's able to, achieve things and get things done.
How do you make sure that your brand supports your career goals instead of distracting from them?
Like to separate the two things, but I also think that they are well integrated. And I know I feel like it makes no sense. Basically, when I'm working, so basically that's how I like to like talk about it. There's my 9 to 5, and then there's my 5 to 9. They're two separate things, but at the same time, they go hand in hand because it's always me, but I'm just changing hats. And at work, I feel like there's always a structure. Like you always have to follow the structure which is given by the company, and it's usually like a rigid structure. You have to follow rules, you have to comply with things. Whereas in my 5 to 9, I feel like I'm able to express myself and be more creative. And but at the same time, I feel like I'm able to use the rigidity of my 9 to 5 in my 5 to 9. And I feel like I'm able to use my creativity that I get in my 5 to 9 in my 9 to 5, if it makes sense. I feel like, yes, they're separate, but they need each other. You need a little bit of both.
So if somebody listening or watching is being really inspired by you right now and they are in a corporate role and they're working full time and they can carve out 30 minutes, an hour, a day or a week, what kind of things would you say they should start with at that point to start building a credible brand in the way that you have?
So I always like to say that you have to start with one thing. Like if you have personal commitment, obligations, you don't have much time, you have hard time, managing your time, you have to start with one thing that it's feasible for you in terms of like time commitment. So for instance, it could be, let's say, I don't know, starting with a small project, or it could be like writing a book, for instance, right? Like writing a book takes a while, but you don't have to write it in one sit, right? You can start with like few sentences, but the key the key point is that you have to be consistent with it. Like if you start with this, you have to be consistent. And I think that if you want to be accountable for it, you have to block the time. That's how I work. Like you have to block 30 minutes from your calendar so that you're accountable and you can take your laptop and sit down and actually work for 30 minutes and you have done the job. But you have to be consistent, you have to be constant with it, and you have to be persistent at the same time. Like you cannot let distractions like get away, but it's always better to start with one thing rather than doing different things. And I think from that, like once you are able to end with that goal, you will see that it was never about perfection. It was about the progression. It was about getting there. And you will feel also much more confident when you can see the results of the work that you have done. So it's always better to start one. They say like one bite one elephant at the time. I think I do like to like live by that idea. I think you always have to start with one thing, be consistent, and make sure that you have the time blocked when you're working on that.
I completely agree. And one of my keynote topics at the moment is around doing one thing. And I think you make a really great point there around being consistent, because people might think, oh, I'm going to do all these things. And then they start doing a couple of activities and they don't feel like they're getting any return or momentum quickly. So they give up.
Yeah.
Whereas you've got to keep showing up and you've got to be consistent to be able to see those results. So I think that's great advice. Okay, I've got a couple of last questions for you. What is a personal brand mistake that you see ambitious professionals making?
They want to see the results overnight. It's basically what you have just said. People are not patient, but it takes time to build a brand, and it takes really a lot of time and a lot of work. You have to be, the key point is to be consistent and not look for results in 24 hours. Yeah,
I think that's great advice. What would one sentence be to describe your brand right now?
I would say a multi-talented woman.
Nice. If a listener is thinking, I'm just an employee, I don't need a personal brand, what would you say to them to persuade them otherwise?
You're wrong. You're wrong because, as we were saying before, I think every single human being has a personal brand. It's up to us to basically cultivate it, to find out what we're good at. And personal brand is not necessarily about selling a product, you are the product. So if you are an excellent speaker, if you're an excellent communicator, if you're an excellent leader, those are part of your brands. It's about really taking the time to really understand yourself, explore yourself, and try different things out to find out what you're fit at.
Well, hopefully that will have convinced some people to take some action and do one thing today. Urmi, has been great speaking to you. If anyone listening or watching wants to connect with you, where's the best place for them to find you?
Yes, I have a LinkedIn profile called Urmi Hossain. I have also a YouTube channel called Urmi Hossain. I have my podcast, which is available on Apple and Spotify. It's called Stories Beyond Borders. And I also have an Instagram account with the same name. And if people want to purchase my book, it's available on Amazon, and it's called Discovering Your Identity, A Rebirth from Intuition Struggle.
Amazing. And we'll pop links to those in the show notes to make it super easy for people to find you. Thanks so much for coming on the show. Thank you for listening. If you're serious about growing your profile, take our free profile assessment quiz to see where you're at right now and get hints and tips on how to improve your score. You'll find the link to the quiz in the show notes. If you've enjoyed the episode, it would be mint if you'd subscribe, like, and leave a review. See you next Monday.